In a sleepy corner of the Mekong Delta, where the river bends like an old man's smile and banana trees lean like they're eavesdropping on gossip, there was a small wooden bridge that no one used anymore. The new concrete overpass had long replaced it, taller, stronger, uglier. But beneath that forgotten bridge, where vines hung like curtains and dragonflies danced over still water, a sound still lived. Tap, tap, pause, tap. It wasn't the sound of boats or birds. It was older, wiser, like something sacred waking up. It came from an old man sitting cross-legged in a boat that never moved, surrounded by blocks of dark, water-worn wood. His name was Ung Fu. To most, he was the crazy carver, the man who talked the wood and never sold a thing. But once, long ago, he was a master. His carvings stood in pagodas, schools, even the National Museum in Hanoi. Then one day, he vanished. No one knew why. Not until a girl named Mai Lan, a university student home for the summer, wandered beneath the bridge, chasing a lost flip-flop, and heard the sound. She froze. It wasn't just carving. It was rhythm, purpose. She peeked behind the curtain of banana leaves and saw him. Silent, focused, his chisel dancing like a calligraphy brush. He didn't look up, but he spoke. If you're going to watch, sit still. Wood listens. She obeyed, heart pounding. Something in his voice didn't sound crazy at all. It sounded ancient. And just like that, the summer changed. If you've ever stumbled into a hidden place and felt like you were meant to find it, this story is yours. Subscribe to Woodcarving Artist and follow the sounds beneath forgotten bridges, where the old world still breathes, one cut at a time. That evening, Mai Lan didn't go home. Not right away. She sat until sunset, listening, watching. And when she finally stood to leave, Ong Fu handed her a small carved fish. The river never forgets, I said. She didn't understand what he meant, not yet. But soon, she would. That night, Mai Lan couldn't sleep. The small carved fish lay on her desk, its form rough but strangely alive. She had held it the entire walk home, not because it was beautiful. It wasn't, not in the way souvenirs or gift shop pieces are, but because it felt warm, not from the sun, but from memory. Her fingers traced its fins, the little notch in its tail. There was something about it, something deliberate. She turned it over. On the bottom, etched so faintly you could barely see it, were three symbols: a swirl, a dot, and a curve. Not letters, not any language she knew. She opened her laptop and searched for the symbols, but nothing came up. The river never forgets, he had said. She didn't understand, but she wanted to. The next morning, she returned to the bridge. Ong Pu was already carving as if he hadn't moved. She didn't say anything, just sat. Hours passed. He carved. She watched. Then, without looking up, he said, "You brought it." She pulled the fish from her bag. "Yes." He nodded. "Let me tell you about that fish." He paused, chisel resting in hand. "It's the first thing I ever carved after my son died." Mai Lan blinked. I didn't know you weren't supposed to," he said gently. "No one was. That fish was his favorite. He used to chase them along the rice paddies, fall in the mud trying to catch one, laugh like a thunderstorm." He smiled faintly. "After he was gone, I couldn't carve for a long time. Everything felt hollow, useless. Then, one day, I picked up a block of driftwood from the river. It had a crack in it, deep, ugly, but something in it looked like a fish. I carved around the crack, didn't try to hide it, just followed the grain. That's what you're holding." My Lan stared at the carving. So the crack is the memory, he said, the hurt. You don't hide pain in art, you give it shape. If you've ever carried grief in silence and wish someone could just see it, this story is for you. Subscribe to Woodcarving Artist and follow the stories carved not to impress, but to heal. My land stayed longer that day. When she left, he gave her a piece of raw wood. Carve something, he said. Anything? She laughed nervously. I don't know how. He finally looked her in the eyes. The fish didn't eat her. It still found its way. It happened on the 5th afternoon. The rain had started early. A thick, southern kind of rain that seemed to fall sideways and never stop. My lawn showed up anyway, soaked to the knees, gripping the block of wood he'd given her like it was a letter from another world. She didn't expect him to be there, but he was, sitting in the same place, shirtless under the downpour, carving as if the rain didn't exist. You'll warp the wood, she said, stepping closer. The river warps everything, he replied without looking up. You just learned to carve with the bend. She laughed. That's not in any textbook. He looked at her then, eyes sharp, almost amused. Exactly. That day, something changed. Maybe it was the rain. Maybe it was how she held the wood. Or maybe he was finally ready. After lunch, he stood. Come. He walked to the back of the hut, a place she hadn't noticed before. Beneath it, half submerged in mud and shadow, was an old fishing boat. Or rather, what was once a boat. Now, it was a room, a secret, a shrine. He ducked down, motioned for her to follow. The moment she stepped inside, she forgot how to breathe. Every inch of the boat's inner walls was covered in carvings, not hung, carved into the wood itself. The ribs of the boat held stories. A water buffalo, mid-yawn. A woman combing her hair under the moonlight. A child chasing a lantern. All of them, perfect. No one's seen these, he said, sitting cross-legged in the center. They were never meant to be sold. They were meant to stay. Why here? She whispered. Because it floats, he said. When the water rises, these memories don't drown. They rise with it. Her voice cracked. This is a museum. No, he replied softly. This is grief. Beautiful grief. Held together by wood. If you've ever built something just to remember who you were and who you lost, this part is for you. Subscribe to Woodcarving Artist and step into a gallery that doesn't ask for tickets. Only reverence. My lawn knelt, fingers brushing the edge of a carved star. Did you do all of this alone? He looked at her for a long moment, then said, until today. She looked up. You mean, you're carving tomorrow, he said. This boat needs more stories. She swallowed hard. But what if I ruin it? He handed her a chisel. Then we carved the crack into something beautiful. The chisel felt heavier than it looked. My lawn held it awkwardly, like a scalpel she wasn't trained to use. The boat creaked gently beneath her, as if the wood itself were breathing, waiting. Start here, Ong Pu said, tapping a blank panel between two carvings. One of a child flying a kite, the other of a banyan tree with roots like rivers. But it's too beautiful already, she said. If I mess up, it'll ruin the flow. He shook his head. Flow isn't symmetry, it's honesty. She knelt, hands trembling. She had drawn all her life, on paper, screens, her iPad at school. But this was different. This wasn't a canvas she could delete. This was permanent, real, alive. She took a deep breath, raised the chisel, lowered it, raised it again. What if I can't? She whispered. Often the wood stays quiet, he said, but it wants to speak. And you came back. So she struck. The first cut was shallow, barely a scratch. The second, deeper but shaky. The third, clean, straight, sure. And just like that, something in her chest loosened. She forgot the fear, the pressure, the idea that it had to be perfect. She just carved. She carved a woman holding a conical hat standing knee-deep in the Mekong. It was based on her mother. Not because it looked like her, it didn't, but because it felt like her. Strong, graceful, quiet in sorrow. Hours passed, rain returned, the air grew thick, but she didn't stop. Not until she stepped back, wiped her forehead, and realized she had done it. The carving wasn't masterful. It didn't shine, but it belonged. And more importantly, it spoke. You listened, Ong Pu said softly. To what? To the wood, he replied. And to yourself. If you've ever feared that your voice didn't matter, or that your story wasn't worthy of a place among the greats, this moment is yours. Subscribe to Woodcarving Artist and watch what happens when someone dares to make their first cut and lets the soul lead. My Lan looked down at her hands. They were blistered, splintered, but proud. Do I get to carve another one? She asked, almost shyly. Ong Pu smiled, something warm behind his tired eyes. You have to. Why? Because now, the boat's no longer mine alone. They came quietly at first. Just two old men from the village. One holding a chicken, the other barefoot with a cigarette behind his ear. They peered beneath the bridge like children sneaking into a haunted temple. My Lan looked up from her carving, startled. Who are they? She whispered. Ong Pu Kong Dung Viexlam. Memory has ears. You carve in silence long enough, people start to hear. The visitors said nothing, just nodded politely and sat on the muddy bank, watching, listening. A week later, more came. A teacher from the nearby school, a monk who used to be a boat maker, a woman holding her daughter's hand, both wide-eyed. By the end of the month, there was a worn path down to the edge of the water, a path carved not by feet, but by reverence. My Lan wasn't ready. She had carved just 4 panels by then, each one better than the last, but still raw, still clumsy in her eyes. She hid her tools when people came, stood to the side, let Ong Pu speak. But one afternoon, a man in a pressed white shirt and sunglasses stepped forward. Who carved this? He asked, pointing to her latest panel. A girl sitting in a rainstorm, smiling. Ong Pu Kong Traloy. The man turned to her. You? She nodded hesitantly. The man grunted, crossing his arms. It's interesting, naive, but this feeling. It wasn't praise, not really, but it wasn't rejection either. She bit her lip. Thank you? He leaned in. How much for this panel? She froze. It's not for sale. The man laughed. Everything is, eventually. Ong Pu stood then, not angry, not rude, just certain. This boat doesn't float for money, only for memory. The man looked amused. All right, old man, but Arthur hides dies. He left, the others stayed. That evening, my Lan stared at her hands again. What if he's right? He's not, said Ong Pu. But even if he were, would it change what your carving meant to you? She shook her head. No. Then that's all that matters. If you've ever questioned whether your gift was enough, or feared that others would measure what was meant to be sacred, this part is yours. Subscribe to Woodcarving Artist to stay with us, where art breeds not for price, but for purpose. As the stars blinked awake, more villagers gathered near the bridge. No one spoke loudly. No one pointed. They just sat, as if waiting for something holy. And in that quiet, my Lan picked up her chisel and carved anyway. It started with smoke, not the kind from incense or cooking fires, but sharp, acrid, unnatural. My Lan smelled it first, rising through the damp air near the bridge. Then came the flicker of orange reflected on the water. Fire! Someone shouted from the bank. The villagers scrambled. Children screamed. And in the middle of it all, the boat, the sacred boat under the house, began to glow from the inside like a dying star. My Lan ran faster than she ever had. Her feet slipped in the mud. Her breath caught in her throat. But she didn't stop. The flames had started at the far end, near the oldest panels, the ones Ong Pu had carved in grief. The cause? A careless lantern left by a curious visitor. Maybe a spark. Maybe fate. But none of it mattered now. She plunged into the shallow water, shouting, "Buckets! Water! Anything!" But it was too late. By the time they doused the flames, 1/3 of the boat was gone. Blackened wood, ash where once there were memories, the banyan roots, the mud of brushing her daughter's hair. Gone. Ong Pu Kong Kuch. He just sat in the mud, his hands soaked in soot, staring into the remains like a man watching a funeral. My Lan dropped beside him. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have checked. I should have locked it." "No," he said softly. "You carved. That was enough." She looked at him, eyes burning. "But everything you built, not everything," he said. "Look." He pointed at her panel, the girl in the rain, still untouched. That stayed, because it was meant to. The villagers gathered, silent. No one took pictures, no one spoke. They simply watched as the river carried ash away like prayers not fully spoken. That night, under the quiet weight of loss, my Lan sat beside the ruins. "Should we rebuild it?" she asked. "No," he said. "We continue it." "But how?" "We carve the fire too. If you've ever lost something you thought you couldn't live without, and still chose to begin again, this moment belongs to you. Subscribe to Woodcarving Artist and carve with us not just through beauty, but through the burn. In the days that followed, the boat was no longer just a shrine. It became a scar. But even scars can become sacred. And as my Lan traced her fingers along the charred edge, she knew the story didn't end here. It had only just begun. The morning after the fire, my Lan arrived early. The sun was just a smear of orange above the treetops, and mist curled low over the river like a secret. She didn't bring paper. She didn't bring a phone, just 2 chisels. One for her, one for him. Ong Pu was already there, sweeping ash from what remained of the boat's inner wall. He moved slowly, not out of weakness, but care, like someone tending to a wound too fresh to bandage. "You came back," he said without turning. "Of course," she replied. "We still have wood." He paused, nodded. "Yes, we do." They worked in silence for hours, scraping black from between the panels, cleaning corners the fire had licked but not devoured. She found half a carving still clinging to the grain, a boy reaching for a kite. The top was gone, but the reaching hands remained. "Do we erase this?" she asked. "Never," he said. "We carve around it." So that's what they did. They didn't rebuild the missing panels. They carved beside them. New faces, new symbols, and in the center, where the damage had been worst, they left the blackened frame untouched, not as a scar, but as a window, a shape of absence, a space to breathe. People began visiting again, More now. Some came barefoot. Some brought candles. One woman knelt and whispered to a panel as if it were her late husband's photo. Another placed a lotus blossom inside the charred hollow. No one asked if it was for sale. Not anymore. They understood. Mylan watched them, something stirring deep inside her. Not pride, not even joy, but belonging. I never thought I'd be part of something sacred, she told Ong Fu one evening. He smiled. Neither did I, until I lost it the first time. And now I know, he said, that ash is just wood, waiting for a new story. If you've ever rebuilt your heart not by hiding the burn, but by letting it shape you, this story is yours. Subscribe to Woodcarving Artist and stay with us as we give form to what remains and honor it. That night, they carved together until the moon rose high. No music, no words, just the soft knock of tools and the river listening below. The last panel was blank. A clean square of jackfruit wood, smooth as skin, framed in quiet expectation. It sat there for days while Mylan hesitated, not because she lacked ideas, but because she now understood what the final carving meant. This wasn't decoration, it was declaration. One morning, as dew clung to the banana leaves and cicadas cried softly in the distance, she turned to Ong Fu. What if I can't finish it? He looked at her eyes calm but tired. And he won't. But they're all waiting. The villagers, the visitors, even you. He shook his head slowly. I was waiting, but not for the panel. I was waiting for you to decide whether this was just a summer or your life. The words hit her like chisel on stone. Her life. She had a scholarship waiting in Saigon, a dorm room, a degree in design. And yet, every day she carved, she felt more herself than she ever had with any syllabus or stylus. That night, she dreamed of the boat floating through time, carrying faces she had never met, carrying hers into waters she didn't know. She woke up crying. The next day, she carved. She didn't draw at first, didn't measure. She simply began. A pair of hands, one old, one young, holding the same chisel. Above them, a small fish leaping from water toward the moon. And behind it all, faint but present, the silhouette of a burned tree, reborn as bloom. When she finished, she stepped back and exhaled. It was not flawless, but it was true. Ong Fu came beside her, silent. Then he placed something in her palm, the first fish he had ever carved. You remember? She whispered. Always, he said. Now it's yours. If you've ever stood at the edge of who you were and chosen to step into who you could be, this moment is yours. Subscribe to Woodcarving Artist and witness how one chisel, one soul, one choice can carry tradition beyond time. Weeks later, when the rains returned, the boat didn't flood. The villagers had raised it, built a platform beneath it, not to protect the art, but to protect what it meant. Mylan didn't leave for Saigon that year. Instead, she began teaching children to carve beside the river. And every evening as the sun dipped low, the sound beneath the bridge returned. Tap, tap, pause, tap. Only now, it echoed in more than one pair of hands.